program. So these are standard announcements, but I think it's better to adhere to them formally. Number one is that, if the faculty preceptors, they have any conflict of scheduling, they are encouraged to swap or exchange with each other. So for example, Dr. Shekhar Patel was supposed to be going to India, so he exchanged with Professor Pathak. So the slot that was assigned to Professor Pathak was given to Dr. Patel, and Professor Pathak would be chairing a seminar sometime in February. And I would request both the fellows to do the same thing. If there is a timing conflict, scheduling conflict, both of you talk amongst yourselves and substitute for each other. It doesn't mean that one gets advantage over the others, because the workload would be still equal. The only thing is that if somebody has a timing issue or a scheduling conflict, the other fellow can make the presentation during that slot, and the first fellow then makes in the other fellow's slot. While we are focusing on these seminars, I also don't want you to forget about your research proposals. Start working on your research proposals that you had, the idea that you had submitted. Slowly, steadily, every week, review the literature, your research question, talk to any of your faculty preceptors, depending on the area of interest. So that should be a simultaneous process. Fellowship training also this is like at least post, postgraduate level of study program. So there's a lot of requirement of self-study. And I had actually sent a link to Stanford University's, self-study sort of reading list. Both the fellows should have access to that. So wherever you are, you want to review a particular area on human rights, you go to that link, and they have a whole lot of information, articles, books, etc., etc. So that is a resource material for you on human rights, the standard Stanford University curriculum. We have the plans that every 6 months we'll take a batch of 2 fellows. So since we have 2 fellows, you have your friends, your family members, if anyone is interested, encourage them to, start thinking in terms of application. And since we have almost 5 months, the process of application for them can be much more smoother and much more coordinated, rather than very brief time for both Ankit and Ripudaman. So as our fellows, you are flag bearers of our institution. You are the educational and scholarly ambassadors of ICHRRF. So we would hope that you will help the institution get more people interested in the fellowship training program, and you would encourage them to apply in your sphere of influence, etc., etc. So, we are taking, continuously applications. If there are fellows that are, if there are people that are interested in applying for July batch of fellowship, I think please encourage them. Part of this fellowship training is also raising the scholarly, academic, and research profile of our fellows. So I have devised a very nice way that both the current fellows will have the benefit of authorship, chapter authorship in a book. And Professor Pathak and I are editing a book on human rights and religious freedom. So we will be assigning you chapters, both the fellows, and I think it'll be a good idea that you get some credit in a book chapter to your name while you're doing this fellowship. So it makes you more like internationally known that you contributed a book chapter and things like that. So after today's seminar, I will be kind of speaking to you about the book chapters. I will probably call Ankit separately and I'll speak to Ripudamanji separately. Okay. So before I hand over the seminar to our today's faculty preceptor, I have one sort of piece of information. Today's seminar will be dealt with slightly in a different manner rather than the standard format. Our fellow for today's seminar had some health issues this week, and we are aware of it, and we don't want to make a public kind of announcement about it. So I think what we will do that we will modify this format, and the preceptor will do the discussion straight away, followed by some question and answers. Is that clear with you, Carl?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
And Ripudaman, is that okay with you?
Yes, sir, Adityanji.
Okay. So I think what I will do, I will stop sharing my screen and we will straight away go to the faculty preceptor. I'm very happy that we have Professor Nanda and Professor Vemsani also join in. And we have Mr. Vineet Goel from Columbus, Ohio. So our seminars are becoming good academic material. Also, all these seminars are recorded. So if anybody is interested, these will be available on our website. So depending on the topic, if someone is interested, they missed the previous seminars, then they should, listen to those seminars. So without further ado, let me invite our today's faculty preceptor, Mr. Carl Clemens.
Thank you, Dr. Athanji. Good evening and welcome everyone, especially to distinguished faculty, Professor Nanda and Professor Vemsani. Today's topic on polycentricity and paganism in America is interesting because it touches pretty much every facet of human rights and religious freedom that ICHRRF stands for. So it's a very interesting topic, and I suspect that many subtopics that we will touch upon today can themselves be made full-fledged training sessions down the line as the fellowship progresses. So let me share my screen. I've prepared a presentation. Are the slides visible?
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Okay, so I'll take off from here. So polycentricity and pagan cultures in America. We'll start off just by defining what polycentricity is. This term really became, entered academia in the early 1950s, thanks to Michael Polanyi, who's a famous Hungarian-British. He was a polymath. He was a scientist. He was an economist, a philosopher, and he defined it roughly as a structural feature of social systems comprising many decision centers, not just one, but many decision centers, each having limited and autonomous prerogatives, and all of them operating under an overarching set of rules. So you can think of it like a distributed network, just like you have a distributed network of computers that are parallelly processing and working on perhaps the same overarching problem, following the same overarching rules, but each one is a node unto itself, a server unto itself. In other words, the participants in a polycentric system are all individuated. In other words, you can't pigeonhole any of them into any particular category. Rather, each node or each participant in a polycentric network it stands at the intersection of different categories. They serve as a server, to other clients. They serve as a client to other servers. It's just like a computer network. Similarly, in human systems as well, you have the concept of polycentricity. So it was Michael Polanyi who came up with this in 1951, his basic scientific contributions are in the field of physical chemistry. But then, like I said, he was a philosopher as well, and he applied some of those to economics. And then Eleanor Ostrom and her husband Vincent Ostrom, they applied the concept much later to economics, and for that, Eleanor won the Nobel in 2009, which again brought polycentricity to the fore and became a big word in our generation today. So Polanyi's basic idea for polycentricity came after he visited the USSR, the Soviet Union at that time, and he met with Bukharin, Nikolai Bukharin, who was, he was a Bolshevik revolutionary, and he was part of the planning commission in the Soviet Union. And Bukharin told him that in Russia, all science has to follow the diktat of the 5-year plan. So in other words, if you were a scientist in the USSR at that time, you would be told what to work on based on whatever the 5-year plan decided was important. It wasn't like you as a scientist worked on what interested you the most or what you thought would be a great contribution to your country, your society, and to humanity, but rather what was important and what was significant and what direction science should take was decided by some committee which created the 5-year plan. And in that centralized way, then that was farmed out, the work was farmed out to scientists in different streams of science across the Soviet Union. Polanyi saw that, and he was, and there were some Marxists in the UK as well who were advocating for something similar. And this worried Polanyi. He did not like that system at all. And so he came up with the idea of polycentricity because of an interest in social conditions, preserving the freedom of expression, as well as the rule of law. So as he developed this concept of polycentricity, it had its applications in jurisprudence, in urban networks, in governance. So urban networks, it was taken into urban networks by Dawoodi. It was taken into governance and then economics by the Ostroms. Now, just to go a little bit further into the philosophical roots, we'll see that, if we want to analyze a system or create it or strategize to change something. So ICHRRF, we're not so much an activist organization as we are an intellectual and academic organization. So when we strategize, we have to look at it from an intellectual perspective. And then when we go into philosophy, we can talk about ontologies. But ultimately, I feel that even superior to ontology would be epistemology, which is the science of what it is to know something, or how is something even known. So so one of the schools of thought that Polanyi really drew upon was Gestalt psychology, Gestalt theory in general, and especially Gestalt psychology. And he said that science basically, or any kind of scientific endeavor, was a spontaneous order. So that's a Gestaltic term, and we'll come to that. It was a spontaneous order that arises from open debate amongst specialists in various fields or in that field. So spontaneous order basically means that it arises in a non-linear fashion. It's something that is part intuitive. It's not just a linear process or a rigorous process that's followed, but rather it's often non-linear. It comes from the depths of one's subconscious at times. Things bubble up, ideas bubble up, solutions bubble up, even framing new problems bubble up. And Gestalt means basically the whole is more than just the sum of its parts. There's something more to it. And one of the things that Polanyi did was he started targeting philosophical currents that he felt were fundamentally opposed to the concept of polycentricity. One of which was positivism from Comte, from Auguste Comte, because and this is significant because the whole of modern science is based on a logical positivism. But positivism, basically what it says is, it says that if something is genuinely true, then it's always true in all spaces, in all times, all cultures. It doesn't need to be proven again and again. It doesn't need to be revisited at all. And it's true for all people. It's a kind of a universalized idea of what truth is. But what Polanyi says is that truth is actually relative to time, space, culture, the maturity of the recipients. There's a maturity model in which you can grade different kinds of truths. So in that sense, if you think about it from the Sanskritic Darsanic philosophy, it's Desha Kala Patra, as we say. So that was his idea, and that any particular truth claim has to be evaluated within a certain psychophysical context, right? So if someone is studying something in science or any other field, that person is not separate from what he's studying. That person, he or she, is a part of what he's studying, and his subconscious is a part of what he's studying. And so the problems that he sees and also the solutions that he proposes are also a reflection of who he or she himself is, right? So that's important to keep in mind. And the other thing that he attacked was the critical philosophy of Kant. So Immanuel Kant and his philosophical successors, they argue that the primary role of philosophy should be to be skeptical and to be critical. That the job of philosophy is not to justify knowledge or systems of knowledge, or to try to understand them epistemologically, but rather to just criticize, to place a critique in front of whatever science is out there. So in other words, it's the primarily skeptic role. And he criticized that. He said that that's kind of it invalidates so many other knowledge processes. For instance, many great scientists, for instance, let's say Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr said that in a dream he saw electrons revolving around a nucleus, and that's what helped him come up with this theory. He just saw it in a dream. Or if you look at Srinivasa Ramanujan, great mathematician, he said that he had visions from the goddess he worshipped, and that's what gave him solutions to mathematical problems. Similarly, there are so many other examples of great scientists, and these are only scientists who are such great stalwarts in their field, scientists and mathematicians, that they can afford to talk about their dreams and their intuitive processes. But I know of several scientists here who are prominent in their field, but they don't talk about this so much, although they'll talk about it in private, because it will invite a lot of criticism and skepticism, because the culture of science today follows more of a critical philosophy. And today we see that being applied to the social sciences as well, critical theory and so forth. So all of that has its roots in these philosophies. But Polanyi thought that they were fundamentally flawed, because the reality of science was that it doesn't follow that kind of linear process and that kind of purely fact-based justification. In other words, there are many things that we think that we cannot express, right? And that's true as much for a scientist as it is for a religious savant. So as you can see, from philosophy to religion is not a very big step. So polycentricity ultimately has that kind of a Gnostic roots, right? It's a more Gnostic kind of Gnostic leaning philosophy. So polycentricity, although there is no one center, it may involve transactional hierarchies without negating the validity of all the participants in a hierarchy. So for instance, again, in the Sanskrit tradition, for instance, if you look at Madhva's Vaishnavism, he talks about a hierarchy of the 33 devatas with Vishnu at the top, and he makes it very clear that the Vaishnava doesn't just worship Vishnu, but rather worships the whole hierarchy, right? It doesn't invalidate. It's like the hierarchy itself is the person. So one telescopes into the other. One scope of one epistemic scope telescopes into the other, and that's basically the idea. So it's a similar kind of concept over here. So in theology, it refers to a pluralistic philosophy with a transcendent, or more commonly immanent, unity in diversity. So it's like a sutre manigana eva. It's like in the Bhagavad Gita. I'm the thread that runs through different forms of thought, different modes of worship, and so on. Sometimes people equate polycentricity with polytheism, and to a large extent that may be true, but it's not wholly true. There may be people who classify themselves or are classified as monotheists, but who are polycentric. I just give the example of Madhva Vaishnavism, which is often classified as a monotheistic faith. But the kind of devotion that they practice is an integrated devotion. I gave the example of Madhva, where it's all the devatas, all the are integrated within that concept of, within the devotion to Vishnu. That is different from what I call the angry schismatic monotheism, or which is exclusivist, which we often see with Christianity and Islam, and to a great extent with Judaism, is where it's this God and all the other gods are false or even positively evil, and their integrity is questioned, and they are sort of in many ways sort of condemned. So there's a big difference over there. The process of devotion, one is integrative, the other is exclusive. Also, all participants, all theologies that would call themselves polycentric, they acknowledge a vast common ground between themselves and several other participating religions, and all of them governed by a meta-religious set of principles. So even in the Eastern context, you take a look at Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Shintoism, they all have a common vocabulary for many things. They talk about dharma and karma and things of that sort. So there's an overarching set of principles, a common vocabulary, and there's a lot of common ground between these traditions. So I'll leave this here at this point, but like I said, some of these concepts can become training sessions in themselves, and I'll explain why strategically it's kind of important, because we'll see that even the pagan community in the United States, because of the political polarization that's happening now, they're finding themselves allying with philosophies that are fundamentally opposed to the wellsprings of polycentric philosophy. And so if we go to that route, that philosophical route, then we can probably bring some clarity and help build a more solid platform on which pagans and other polycentric religious traditions can come together and advocate for values that they truly believe in, instead of making temporary alliances. So let's first just get to what pagan beliefs are. And we have Professor Vemsani on here, a history professor. So madam, please feel free to jump in anytime, correct me, or add anything you might want to add. So one of the things with paganism today is there's a great deal of ignorance about what they believe in, and there's a lot of disinformation about what pagans stand for. They are often identified with Satanism, and maybe with the Goth subculture, but that's not the case at all. So let's just quickly go over what they believe in some of their practices. So pagans, they don't have any single text that they follow. There are many ancient sources, textual sources, as well as oral traditions and folk traditions. Some of the more commonly mentioned pagan sources, like the Pagan Reed, which is basically a creed of the Wiccans, especially. And while, like, for instance, one of the most oft mentioned principles is the rule of three, which is that anything you do, good or bad, comes back to you threefold. So that's basically it's kind of like a law of karma. It's the basics of their ethics, and this is important to note because often pagans are accused of being of practicing hexing people, cursing, practicing curses and spells and all kinds of vicious ideas, but that goes against fundamental principles of paganism, and that's not true at all. Paganism is based on a continuing discipleship, the Guru Shishya Parampara. It's a kind of a continuing discipleship and reinterpretation of their tradition in present time and present circumstances. So discipleship is important. It's not necessarily the same kind of discipleship as you might find in other traditions like Buddhism or Hinduism, but discipleship is definitely an important part. There are several initiations. It's kind of like a Gnostic school of sorts. And the way it stands today, with the emergence of a pagan priesthood in the United States and a system of discipleship, while there are many people who are dilettante pagans or they're just doing their own thing, to truly become a part of the community and receive initiations and to classify as to qualify as being converted to paganism, there's a 1-year commitment required of discipleship before the first initiation. So not easy. It's not as simple as converting to some of the major religions like Islam or Christianity. Similarly, pagans will acknowledge the existence of many gods, but usually they have one chosen beloved, sort of Ishtadevata. They may involve a hierarchy of gods, like I just mentioned. Some of their basic principles involve a responsibility for beliefs. That is, you are responsible to find what beliefs really click with you. When you become a disciple of paganism, you are not told what to believe, but rather you're given a sort of mental map, and you're guided to find what is it that resonates most with what you believe at this point. And as you go along the path, your beliefs will continue to change and evolve as you grow along the path. So they strongly believe that the individual should choose their own beliefs. It should not be decided by a preceptor or by a group or by society or by the government or by the education system or the media. The second thing is a personal responsibility for one's own actions and one's own spiritual growth. So responsibility for one's own actions in the sense that it's not God who's working through you or an angel, but you take responsibility based on who you are for what you do in society. And also your own spiritual growth depends on the work that you put in and the sincerity and authenticity that you bring to the path. It's not based on a particular historical or existing savior. There's no shortcuts. One has to do the work. Very important aspect of their credo is that everything is sacred. And that includes not just all human beings, but all living entities, animals, plants, the earth, rivers, mountains, everything, the cosmos. So this is very important, and we'll see this is something that reintroducing the sacred into a life today, which is kind of stripped of sacredness in many ways in today's society, is a big point of attraction for people towards paganism. It also is something that motivates a lot of pagan activism in various fields like environmentalism and human rights. The freedom to choose one's own deity. Again, this kind of goes along with responsibility for one's own beliefs. So even the deity that you choose is based on one's own sort of inner, pattern. It's sort of like your Adhisthata Devta. You have to find that yourself. Scope of consciousness. So pagans believe that consciousness is not just limited to human beings. It extends to animals. Animals have consciousness. Plants have consciousness. They even believe that so-called inanimate objects and the earth itself has a consciousness of its own. That's a far cry from even modern science. Like if you look at Descartes and many other Western scientists and philosophers, they believe that animals did not have souls. They consider, and Descartes called animals non-sentient automata. In other words, they were just like pre-programmed, and they just reacted to stimuli. They didn't actually experience anything. They didn't even experience pain. In fact, Descartes, he would go into the countryside where, older pagan beliefs still persisted. So Christianity at the time did not believe that animals have a soul. In fact, even women, even human females did not have a soul in the same way that a man did. That was what Christian belief was at that time. But in the countryside, there was still a sense that nature and animals and plants had a soul. So Descartes had a mission. He was on a mission. He would go into the countryside, into the villages, and he would gather the village folk, and he would nail a dog to the barn door, and the dog would be squealing in pain, and he would explain to the shocked audience that actually what you're seeing, the dog isn't actually experiencing pain. The dog is just going through a set of pre-programmed reflexes to the stimulus of nails being put into the dog. So coming from there, this is today this may be I think a lot of people understand this, but coming from here, it's a far cry from that. Similarly, pagans will privilege experience over doctrine. So doctrine for them is a scaffolding you navigate, but lived and personal experience is of much more worth than any doctrine.
There is some problem with your audio. There's a lot of echo and reverberations.
I see. I'm not sure what the issue might be. 1 second. Let me stop sharing and reshare. Are the slides visible?
Yes.
How about my audio? Is this better right now?
Yes.
Okay. So they also regard the deity as immanent rather than transcendent. Now, I wouldn't say this for all pagan traditions existing today, but generally they lean towards immanent, which means that it sort of goes with pantheism, which states that the physical creation is a manifestation of Godhead, that God is not different from the world and is not separate from it either. So immanence is something that is generally given more importance than a transcendent God. But that's not true for all, but in general, this is the position taken. They believe in multiple paths to the divine. They stress the idea of community cooperation and human interdependence. So it's like the idea of dharma, the way the concept of dharma evolved in India. Similarly, in European pagan traditions, the idea of community cohesion and human interdependence, not just between humans of all kinds, but also humans and animals, humans and the ecology in general. Community cooperation is a very, very big part, and as we'll see, this is again a big part of the attraction for paganism today, because they often believe in face-to-face, personal, small groups forming a brotherhood, which is attractive to a lot of Americans today in a society that has sort of become alienated and insular. They believe that one's lifestyle should be consistent with one's belief, and that's sort of, it seems obvious. But theologically, if you look at the Western tradition with Christianity, for instance, there's this dichotomy between faith and work and works. That means one's deeds may not sometimes be consonant with, may not resonate with one's faith in one's savior. Or similarly with this, like I think Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in India during the freedom struggle, he was asked about Gandhi. And he said that I think Gandhi is a really, really great guy, but he said, based on my philosophy and my faith, and he was talking about Islam, he said, I have to believe that even a Muslim who is a murderer and a rapist is at a higher level than Mr. Gandhi because of his faith. He has rested his faith in the Prophet Muhammad and in Allah, and therefore he will be saved, but not Mr. Gandhi. So if you contrast it with that, this is not as obvious as it may seem. And so this is important for pagans, is that your deeds are as important as your beliefs, or maybe even more important. Paganism actually welcomes a healthy skepticism. They say a skeptic makes a good, a practitioner. They ask you to question everything, including any kind of doctrine or practices. Again, this is different from unquestioning devotion. They have a respect for all beings. Again, I'm mentioning this again because this is very important. They have a very strong egalitarian streak. They dislike hierarchies. Even in their own communities, they prefer a rotating form of leadership for the most part. And they, in the political space, they tend to be allergic to any community that is seen as being, hierarchical or privileging some kinds of people over the other. So some typical pagan practices, going over these is important because you'll see that almost all the practices listed here were banned at one time in Western countries, and they could even get you burned at the stake. So one of them is herbal medicine. So very often your pagan priest or priestess would also be your medicine man or medicine woman, witch doctor, as they say. So just like you have Ayurveda in India or Chinese traditional medicine or Iranian traditional medicine, you had herbal medicine traditions in Europe, which were stamped out by the church, actually. But herbal medicine is very much a part of pagan practice. And that involves not just herbs and potions, but also the chanting of certain kind of mantras, if you will, and certain psychological practices, meditation, and so forth. Creating and purifying sacred spaces is an important part. They have a lot of goddess imagery. So pagans worship both god and goddess, but there's a very strong streak of goddess imagery in modern paganism. They follow rituals almost on a daily basis, and they invoke deities. Singing, dancing, drum circles, and chanting of specified chants is very much a pagan practice. Meditation, such as grounding meditation, is something that they practice pretty much every day. It's part of their daily practice. And certain practices for raising energy are also very pagan practices. Crystals, natural objects, amulets, sacred jewelry, sacred clothing. These are part of paganism. Connecting with ancestors or connecting with the dead spirits and ghosts. This is also part of paganism, to honor the dead spirits and also to learn from them. Divination, which could include astrology, it includes tarot cards, several other kinds of things, is very common in pagan cultures. Typically through life, in terms of the kind of ceremonies they officiate, they have several rites of passage as you grow within paganism. They have naming ceremonies for newborns as well as for new initiates. They have initiations, they have home blessings. Cronings is very important. So a crone is an elderly pagan woman, an elderly wise pagan woman. So when a woman enters that last stage of life after she is done with family life, she has raised her children, and her children are now independent, she can undergo a croning initiation where she's initiated as a wise elder within the community, and they play a very important part in the pagan community. And then there's marriage and divorce and funerals. Another thing about paganism is, and pagan symbols are about casting circles, both in their rituals and their dances, in their symbols, a lot of spirals and circles and cycles. They believe in cycles, like they believe in a cyclical notion of time. That's kind of important from a historical perspective. You'll see circles, rock circles, like the Stonehenge, scattered across Europe. So it's part of, it's coming from their idea of what nature is made of, the golden ratio and so forth. So we'll see that paganism today and pagan human rights is also intimately connected with other aspects of human rights and sustainable development. So paganism and the environmentalism movement or sustainability movement. So within paganism, there are two very strong and very prominent movements. One is the Eco-Feminist Movement, which believes that the earth religions, as they call it, or the indigenous religious traditions, which are found across the world, not just in Western paganism, but Native American, Maori, in India, in parts of the Middle East and Africa, they believe that these indigenous traditions, their influence, their ideas need to spread in order for the sustainability movement itself to become sustainable, because they believe just by having policy measures it's not going to change this compulsive consumerism that drives environmental destruction today. So they believe that a spiritual solution is needed, and the rise of earth religions or indigenous religious traditions is a very important aspect of environmentalism and sustainability movement. And the second movement within paganism is the goddess spirituality movement. They believe that recognizing the divine feminine as a goddess and also within oneself is an important part of connecting with nature and being able to change the mindset of humanity to respect the environment and to create sustainable forms of economic and social organization. So because of these, as you can see, both of these are very feminine oriented. The priestess culture in modern paganism in America is very strong. And typically a pagan woman would go through 3 phases of life: maiden, the mother, and the crone. Give me a second here. Oh, okay. Yes, Dr. Adni, I will wrap up soon. So a pagan woman is really a pillar of the community, and that's something to recognize. Similarly, paganism and healthcare has a big role. So as I mentioned, traditional herbal medicine was very much a part of paganism. So, we recognize that most diseases are psychosomatic, over 70%. And so your doctor or your midwife was also a spiritual counselor. So tended both to your body, but also to your mind and to your soul. That was the concept over there. It was a more holistic solution to human illness. So pagan healers, or witch doctors as they were called, were burned at the stake. They were in fact prime targets. And this is even before Western modern medicine really took off, So because they murdered or outlawed so many herbal doctors and midwives, it created a massive shortage of healthcare in the countryside in Europe at that time. And this continued even after modern healthcare sort of began to develop, because it wasn't available in the countryside. It was just mostly in the cities. And healing, the whole healing industry, the healing sector, was monopolized by the state in Europe at that time. And it was given a strong Christian color. So hospitals and healthcare, it's like the Red Cross. That was the way it was typified. And also initially in Western medicine, only men were given access to medical training. Whereas in pagan herbal medicine, women were, if not the majority, they were a big section of practitioners of medicine. So Western paganism has ancient roots. Margot Adler, she'll talk about the universal old religion, kind of like a Sanatan Dharma kind of perennial philosophy. And of course, Greek and Roman philosophers are very popular, but the fact that they were passionate devotees of their chosen deities is often, not talked about. Wicca paganism. Wicca is probably the majority of pagans today. And feminist philosophy are very closely intertwined. Starhawk is a very prominent pagan author, podcaster, and an activist. So paganism is an earth religion related to pantheism. How far back does it go? Well, it depends on how far back you want to go. So there's a famous Venus of Willendorf, a place in Austria where a goddess-like figure was found, and she's just called Venus. And that's been dated to 22,000 before the Common Era, BCE. Minoan goddess, 1600 BCE. Egyptian worship of the goddess Hathor, 1200 BCE. So I put these here not just to give an idea of the timeline, but also the geographical spread of Western paganism, which draws upon Norse paganism, Mediterranean, Greco-Roman paganism, but also West Asian, Middle Eastern paganism, and of course Egyptian paganism, very prominent. So the suppression and digestion of paganism has a long history. So from the 4th century onwards, we saw the beginning of the active suppression under Christianity of pagans. There was the demolition of their temples and sacred spaces. the killings of their priesthoods, the burnings of libraries. In fact, a lot of pagan literature survived in Arabic translation because initially the Muslims were quite favorable to learning about them. And then later on, during the Enlightenment phase, the Europeans got it back from the Arabs. 85% of witch burnings, by the way, were of women who were sort of forced into confession. Also, gay men were in significant numbers when they were burned at the stake. Another, apart from outright eradication, another tactic that the church adopted was to co-opt and replace via syncretism. Now, syncretism means I adopt some of your features that I like or that maybe that are popular with people, but I also respect your integrity as a separate person. But in this case, it was to adopt or appropriate certain aspects of paganism, but to destroy paganism itself. So many gods and goddesses were incorporated into Christianity as saints. And then churches were built on top of those shrines. Famous example, of course, would be Notre Dame, which was in the news a couple of years ago when it caught fire and it succumbed to the flames. It was built over a temple. It was built to a Vulcan temple, pagan temple. And Vulcan, ironically, is the god of fire. So that's a bit of poetic irony over there. Also, many pagan festivals on the equinoxes, on the solstices, Thanksgiving, honoring the dead and the ghosts. Talk about Thanksgiving, Halloween, Christmas, Easter. They're all sort of images of all pagan festivals, both in Europe as well as the Middle East. So pagan festivals, classical and folk music. Later on, pagan philosophy also led to the Renaissance and Enlightenment, basically Greek and Roman philosophy. So right up to the 1950s, after World War II, there were still British laws prohibiting the publication of any books sympathetic to witchcraft. And those laws were repealed only in the 1950s. And that's when Gerald Gardner's book was published, where he talked about hereditary pagan lineages that continued in Britain and across Europe, where they were practiced in secret within families or within secret societies in Europe through the centuries of persecution. The United States saw continuity of European persecution of pagans, and in the colonies and also after independence. The Salem witch trials, of course, are iconic. Those were in the 1690s, where about, I think, 13 witches were hung. But that was just one of many outbursts of violence against secret pagan groups in the United States or in the colonies at that time. The 1980s, as recently as 1985, saw something that's called the Satanic Panic, where pagans were beginning to come out of the closet, so to speak. They were becoming public with their faith, and they were being confronted in their communities. Children of pagan parents were kicked out of school. They were being questioned and they were being defamed to a great extent. I also put Mormonism in here. Mormonism is a religion that came into being in the United States. They consider themselves Christian. In fact, they're more Christian than the Pope in many ways, but they're not considered Christian by any other Christian group, Protestant or Catholic. Mormonism has a huge amount of paganism built into it. They have divination, connecting with the dead and so forth. It's all those rituals. They have a lot of ritual in Mormonism. All of that basically comes from paganism. Brazilian Christian groups, which sort of, they're Christian groups, but they've basically taken over some ideas from Brazilian, Amazonian pagan groups or indigenous groups over there. Things like communicating with animals and plants, and also using in small amounts ayahuasca to get into a trance state in order to deal with the subconscious. So those groups also now have a prominent presence within the United States. So the modern pagan resurgence had a few steps. So 1992, there was an international pagan gathering in Salem, Massachusetts, which is where the witch trials happened. And a monument was erected there, honoring in the memory of that persecution. And in the 1993 Parliament of Religions in Chicago, there was a public celebration of paganism. It caused quite a flutter in Chicago, but that gave them their first opportunity to explain to the public that, hey, we're not what you think we are. There's the annual Samhain Festival, which is the pagan New Year. I think it's on October 31st, that's celebrated in San Francisco. Now it's become a national gathering. And since the 1980s till today, the numbers of declared pagans has quadrupled. Remember, I'm just saying declared because there are many pagans who just aren't public with their faith. There are estimated 750,000 Wiccans alone. There's 1 million according to a 1990s estimate. And a 2008 Pew survey said that there were between 1 to 1.5 million pagans. And social media can be a good indicator. You know, pagan handles like the Hood Witch on Instagram have almost 500,000 followers. Important to remember that many pagans are bi-religious. So they may still go to church or synagogue, but they have their own private pagan practice under the tutelage of a pagan priestess. That's kind of important to keep in mind, both for people who, you know, may not have a good opinion of paganism, as well as for people who may want to reach out to pagans. It's important when you reach out to pagans to understand that they are pagan, but they may also be Christian or Jewish or Muslim. Many people are led to modern paganism because they're fed up with toxic consumerism, environmental destruction, and they want a different idea of life, a different worldview. So there's a wide variety of practices in schools. You have Druids, Eco-Feminists, Gaians, Wiccans, and several different types of Wiccans. There are different types of paganism as well. So you have Paleo-pagans, which are they hark to those Norse traditions which are based in the forest and the farm. Then you have Civilo-paganism, which is like the more developed, sophisticated pagan traditions, usually from Greece and Rome, or from the Middle East or Egypt. And then you have Meso-paganism. For instance, Native American paganism, Native American indigenous traditions. So Meso-paganism is where a pagan tradition has been overwhelmed by a conquering separate culture. And although a lot of their culture has been destroyed, they still maintain their own religious practices. So that's called Meso-paganism. And then there's Syncreto-paganism, where they've been overwhelmed to such an extent that they have adopted the symbols of their conquering culture, but in a sort of the undercurrent of their own pagan beliefs and practices and thoughts continues. So you'll see a lot of that in Persian Sufism, or even with many Native American traditions today. You'll see that they're Native Americans, but they also, you'll see a crucifix hanging in their car. You know, that's again important for people to understand who make an outreach to pagans, is that they may be Syncreto pagans. And there's the neo-pagans, where they don't have a continuous, unbroken line of pagan culture, but they believe that by taking those ideas, they can, and connecting with nature, they can sort of restart or reignite that tradition. There's an emphasis on connecting with nature. There's the rise of the divine feminine. There's an emphasis on human connectedness. Individual and small group worship is very prominent. They are very big on egalitarianism. And they believe that many faces of the divine, some of them benign, some of them warlike, they are not in conflict with one another. So the three stages are basically in 80 to 95. 1980, 1995 is where they began to describe themselves. You had Margaret Adler, you had Eugene Gallagher, and their challenge was, for the first time, they were trying to explain what pagan belief and practice is. I'm going to take another 5 minutes, Dr. Adityanji. I know I've got a couple of minutes, but just give me about 5. They had the challenging task of describing paganism in an academic environment where religion was typecast to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, which have a very set doctrine, whereas pagan doctrine is extremely fluid. So their challenge was to sort of expand the concept of what religion and spirituality is within academia over here. 1995 to 2005 is consolidation and community formation. This was also the age of the internet. So they formed virtual communities, they formed local communities. They started to have pagan festivals like cultural festivals like Pagan Pride, where they could come together. Formation of pagan families now, and intergenerational. So now you had people who were born pagans and a hereditary pagan community forming. And once you had children, And then you had things like Spiral Scouts, which is a sort of Boy Scouts organization that was formed to allow children to grow up in a pagan environment. And then from 2005 to the present, they've been working to tackle the legal and constitutional basis of the discrimination that they continue to face. So being a minority in a majoritarian religious culture means that they are constantly either being typecast within some very limited sort of pigeonholed into something within the majority's worldview, or their culture is appropriated. So there are several modern pagan resources. I'll just mention a couple of them. The news network about what's affecting the pagan community, the Pagan Academic Network, and very importantly, the Lady Liberty League. They fight legal battles on behalf of pagans who come forward with the discrimination or the harassment that they face. They have a few established churches, including some that train pagan clergy now. They've had a few legal successes. For instance, in the state of New York now, you can perform legally binding pagan marriages. This person, Susanna Budapest, she fought a 9-year battle after she was arrested for divination to overturn laws that outlaw divination. Laurie Cabot, she fought for the right in Massachusetts to wear pagan costume or to wear an amulet, which was outlawed in Massachusetts. Recently, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they have said that pagans can ask for leave on certain pagan holidays. So you can be open about your faith in the workplace and take leave on certain days. So pagan undercurrents of culture wars. So there's culture wars in the United States that have been going on for a while. And in academia, there's an increasing interest in paganism as a possible candidate for the future of American religion. The reason is today, religion and politics is so polarized in America. Organized religion, very few people follow it anymore, except a few people on the religious right, especially the Christian right. But many people still are interested in spirituality, and many of their beliefs resonate with paganism. So Stephen Smith, law professor at the University of San Diego, the author of Pagans and Christians in the City, Culture Wars from the Tiber to the Potomac, he says that, look, a lot of Western culture that came out from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, things like democracy, things like separation of church and state, things like multiculturalism, pluralism, and so forth that we talk about today, they are fundamental tenets of pagan culture, and these ideas came out of pagan philosophies that influenced the Enlightenment. So why not paganism just come out of the shadows now and take the seat that is currently empty, which is a kind of a civic religion that America needs. So the Western tradition of intellectual and atheistic pantheism, Spinoza, Nietzsche, Emerson, Walt Whitman, all of them drew on pagan traditions. In the modern, in our times, you have Sam Harris and Barbara Ehrenreich, even Ronald Dworkin, who kind of channeled that same pagan thought into the spirituality space. Former Yale Law School Dean Anthony Cronman's Confessions of a Born-Again Pagan, he goes over the entire the role of paganism in the last 500 years of Western civilization. And even on the right, you have people like Jordan Peterson leaning towards a kind of a soft Christianity that kind of makes use of Jungian psychology and Nietzsche as well. And so he's kind of trying to merge the two, Christianity and paganism together. So pagans are productive members of society. They're often stereotyped as being social dropouts or kind of weirdos or even malevolent people, but that's not true at all. They serve in the armed forces, government, nonprofit, private sector. They are they're the frontline activists in environmentalism and sustainability, human rights, pluralism, tolerance, ethics, diversity, holistic approaches to real world problems, including medicine, and also the community festivals, cultural festivals, social service, volunteering, public affairs. So not all pagans are ethno-nationalists, not all pagans are Goths. Those are just fringe elements within the pagan community. So hate crimes against modern pagans continues. 20% of all hate crimes are religious, according to the US Department of Justice. And so far, only a small percentage of them are reported to be against paganism. But like I said, paganism is an invisible population, and many of them don't come forward. They face prejudice, even by law enforcement agencies, discrimination, harassment, defamation. An example I'd given in the talk earlier was about a murder case where the police even gave the murder case the number 666 because there was a pagan in the community whom everybody suspected, and he was identified to be a satanist. He was not a satanist. He was put into jail. He was a teenager at that time. He was put into jail and only released very recently after spending more than half his life in jail, when the Innocence Project took up his case and he was released from jail and found completely innocent. Child custody cases where one partner would accuse the other of being a pagan and therefore unfit to have custody. Business zoning, housing, job discrimination, very common. We had high-profile cases even as recently as last year. And the Lady Liberty League says that there's a noticeable uptick in discrimination against pagans over the last 4 years. This may have something to do with the uptick in right-wing Christianity as well in the United States. So cultural or symbolic annihilation, this is a big facet of ICHRRF's work, is defined as the annihilation, absence, or active unrepresentation or underrepresentation of a cultural group. That is, decimating a culture by disallowing the symbolic representation of that group or misrepresenting that culture within the mainstream media or consciousness. So that could be via mainstream media, the educational system, popular culture, which talks about pagans as, if you watch TV serials related to crime, often many of the criminals are part of some kind of satanic group that is also conflated with paganism. And then demonization by dominant religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And the funny thing is that many Christians who were interviewed said that they viewed pagans as being a threat to Christianity. They thought that paganism was hate speech against Christianity, whereas historically it's sort of the other way around. Most pagans have no antipathy towards Christianity. Some of them are bi-religious, and except for the constant harassment and defamation they face from Christians, if they were left alone, they would have no problem with Christianity at all. So they're an invisible community. Very few established churches. Even though they have established organizations, there are very few established churches that you can find. Most practitioners are individual private practitioners. About 40% of them are involved in small group worships, but they don't have established churches. Large percentage of pagans do not declare their faith in public or at the workplace because they feel that they don't want to have to deal with explaining their faith or overcoming prejudices. So they take the easy way out. Most of them are white Americans, and so they just fit into the community very easily. It's a privileged community. So due to their racial profile, they take the easy way out and keep their paganism. They kind of compartmentalize their paganism. But there's a cost to secrecy and compartmentalization, is that it impedes the evolution of paganism within the American context, as well as the way other religions treat paganism or other people treat paganism within the community. There's no feedback loop. So if someone says something negative about paganism out of ignorance or mischief, there's no pagan to stand up and say, hey, that's not true. Here's what we believe. And so it leads to a cycle of ignorance and concurrent substitution. That means the public in general remains ignorant about paganism, and you have bad actors or irresponsible media people who substitute that ignorance with false notions and myths about what paganism really is. A 2016 survey found that a section of pagans were miserable keeping their faith a secret. They wished that they could be more public about their faith, but still the majority of them remained unwilling to put in the effort to change the status quo, and they seemed comfortable with the way things were. So I'll end with this slide. Waiting to the future, there's many people today talking about what are the strategies for the future of paganism in America. All of them emphasize that Western pagans need to build bridges with philosophers within academia of pantheism and civic religion, many of whom look towards paganism as a possible future candidate for a majority faith in America, even though it's just an incipient faith at this point. Paganism needs to build bridges with the New Age movement. It needs to build bridges with non-Western pagan traditions like the Mayan, Hindu, Shinto, Buddhist, Tao, Tengriism in Central Asia, Maori, Australian Aboriginal, and so forth. But there are challenges to this happening. One is negative cultural stereotypes about one another, like Hindus may have negative stereotypes about pagans, and pagans, one will see, have a lot of negative stereotypes about Hinduism. And so these create barriers, and people are not able to get to kind of reach across those barriers or that gulf in understanding. There's also a lot of disinformation being put out by bad actors or irresponsible authors. Bad actors because in the political space, people might not want to see all these traditions coming together. And so they'll put out disinformation about one and the other in order to keep them separate from one another. And political affiliation and the cancel culture doesn't help either. So we've seen some ICHRRF also has been targeted in this war of information. I said this information warfare that's being waged, and reaching out really means that we have to understand pagan traditions. We have to understand where they're coming from, and then we have to understand how to approach them. And we have to be very patient because pagans are not waiting with garlands for Shintos or Hindus to come and reach out to them. You may be rudely rebuffed or treated as an untouchable, but it requires a certain amount of patience and cultivation in order to bridge that gap. But the potential from there is great. So I'll end with that, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Carl, for this presentation. This is a modified, seminar today. Just an exception; it should not be the norm. Let me invite Professor Vemsani, because she is a domain expert, being professor of history and professor of religious studies. So let's get some comments from Professor Vemsani.
Professor Vemsani, please unmute yourself.
We are not able to hear you. Your sound, the volume is too low.
I'm sorry. Is it working now? You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. All right. You can see me also.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that was a great lecture, Carl. It's very nice. You covered the philosophical aspects as well as the modern concerns and
Thank you.
The practice. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to add something, Professor?
For polytheism, I also see polytheism reviving across the world. So I think the 21st century is for revival. So for more revival, and I think revival is good for us.
Okay.
Good, us in the sense, not us. Revival is good for the world. Polycentrism is always good for the world, rather than looking at anything from a single point. So opening up of the thought process is very good. And religion, of course, religious practice has a real impactful way of opening the understanding multiple aspects. It cannot be done from school education. So it's a positive. I really think it's a positive thing happening.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on, ma'am, was this a dialogue between Eastern and Western pagan traditions, including Hinduism here. I noticed that, especially with Hinduism these days, there are some very some common points that sort of make pagans sort of treat Hindus as untouchables. One is this idea of caste system, which they've been told is based on skin color. And that again ties into the whole Aryan invasion / migration theory. I've seen this brought up even in pagan groups that teach meditation. I've visited them. Even pagan groups that teach Tantra, which is like directly from Hinduism, they'll talk about, oh, this Tantra and yoga is from the Dravidian and not from the patriarchal Aryan Hindu traditions, which impose the caste system. They'll talk about that in their groups. And I have to sit and listen to that. So I was wondering how first of all, does this have any basis in fact? And secondly, what's the way forward? How does one remove these ideas about Hinduism that seem to be just very strong in Western academia?
Of course, the work is still ongoing, and probably you're aware of my work on Aryan theory.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I'm writing books. So once the books come out and once we also hold a conference, probably it will go. But I think this is an entrenched theory. And this is a theory supported by colonialism. And colonialism, of course, stems from, it supported the Hindu phobia. So Hindu phobia, of course, is another big issue. So I'm also working on this Hindu phobia issue, how this ties into Hindu phobia. Of course, we like all the positive things from Hinduism, but we don't want Hinduism. We don't like Hinduism. So it doesn't really work, right? How does that balance? So, yeah. It's all colonialist concoction. There is no theoretical basis to it. There is no practical basis to it. Caste was never part of social system of India. It was practiced by peer groups. The peer groups regulated them for kinship purposes. They wanted to maintain their kinship groups. They wanted to maintain their genealogical groups, whatever purpose they had. It also provided job protection and, issues of hygiene. There are many issues with what they did. The problem with it is incorporating into a power play. It was never a part of the power play in India. Jatis might have existed. Jatis had the flexibility to move up or down. And there is a flexibility for a person to get drawn into another group. There are also recruitments into other groups. And Brahmins, of course, never closed their doors. And we know about Sri Vaishnavism and many of the groups in India that had every person from every group joining them. So the jatis might have existed, but they're not restrictive. They're flexible. They are peer regulated, and they also allowed people to migrate here and there. And the power structure, they're never a part of power structure. For example, in other countries, for example, in Japan, China, Turkey, in Europe, places where aristocracy existed, where a strict caste system or a strict class system existed, the power structure cared for it. They cared for the aristocratic names. They registered these aristocratic names, and they also registered who belonged to this aristocracy, and they maintained these lists all across the world. And India never maintained. What does that tell us? The kings never maintained any list of aristocracy, list of classes, list of jatis. It didn't matter to them. It's only a peer-regulated group. It's not part of the power structure. So, of course, the many issues, many things were spread in the name of caste system, which were not really part of the jati system that was practiced in India. So, of course, we have to bring out more work on this aspect also. But you can share the available work on Aryan theory, and you can also share with them these aspects of flexibility within the jatis in India, and how they differ from other parts of the world, where this class system was part of the power. In India, it was never part of the power structure. It never mattered where the king came from or the priest came from, or many times it's difficult to find the jati of a ruler. There is controversy in history about the jati of many of the rulers. So
Shivaji is a good example.
yeah.
Even prior to Shivaji, Chandragupta Maurya.
Yeah.
So India had a tradition of kings and emperors that were not necessarily from the upper caste. There were a lot of, what you call middle caste or OBCs or whatever. But let me bring to a very interesting observation that initially the Semitic religions abhorred pagan, or rather ancient indigenous traditions, destroyed them by, digesting them. And sort of had a kind of projective identification with those pagan cultures and belief systems. And you are having a circle turning around when Western pagan traditions are trying to Semitize and Christianize. So that is being reflected by calling their temples as churches, pagan churches, which I find very interesting observation from an anthropological perspective. And at this point in time, not only the Western-based pagan groups are using the obvious tools of colonialism and power play, but they are also, using untouchability toward Eastern indigenous traditions, and I'm trying to avoid the word pagan.
Yeah.
And in their bid to use colonialism or ethnocentrism, or let's say Caucasian centrism, they understand that there are a lot of commonalities and probably similarities and equations going on there. But they absolutely refuse to identify with those, knowing that they are similar traditions. So in their bid to isolate themselves from the Eastern traditions, they are becoming more like Christians, although their original enemies were Christians. And I think this sort of attempt to denigrate Eastern traditions is very unfortunate. I've yet to see a person who is Hindu decry pagan traditions. We are always welcoming. So I would say that, the ball lies in the other court. You can show the light to somebody, who has dim vision, but that person who is deliberately blind, you cannot show light to that person. So there's an important political play going on using ethnocentricity to define their status as superior one, although they face the same issues when their cultures were denigrated and destroyed. And I think that's a fallacy. But it's an interesting observation that they are falling into the same pattern. They're trying to Semitize themselves.
Yeah. Interesting observation. Ankit ji and Pudaman Pachori ji, you have any questions for any of us?
Yeah, sure. One question I was thinking about, like, uh, um, one comment or one question actually. The question is, like, we have pagan communities here. Also, there are other indigenous communities. So, do they basically get along with each other, like indigenous people, like considering that they have gone through kind of same level of suppression and oppression by other big uh, religious sects or big religions. So, do they kind of get along with each other and sympathetic about each other and support each other as far as their revival and goals are, spiritual goals are? That is one question. And second, my question is regarding the revival of the pagan culture that Mr. Carl was talking about. Does it also means acceptance or more tolerance towards other people, people from the other faiths? Do you think this is happening? Like people are getting more um, basically recognizing other people from the different faiths also and becoming more softer towards them?
I guess I'll take that. I guess. Or ma'am, did you want to go for it, Professor Vamsani?
I have seen two groups here, the Native American group as well as the revival of Odin Brotherhood. Both of them work in their own way. So I haven't seen much overlap or much interaction. And I haven't seen much interaction with Hindus either. But, I'm living in a small place, so probably somebody living in a bigger city might know more. But what I'm seeing is the revival of Irish, traditions in European sense, like Odin Brotherhood and all these, and Native American traditions, more so in the recent years. More folks are willing to say that they belong to a Native American tribe. They never said that. Even 10 years back, they never said that. So I see that more and more now. So,
Ankit, do
I
you
think
have any questions or queries or comments?
I would like
I
to
think
add that
Carl was going to answer a little bit more from his observation.
No, I think you answered. I just add just one liner that pagan traditions have yet to connect even amongst themselves. Like even all Wiccans, one simple pagan tradition in the United States, even they haven't connected with one another. Like I said, maybe anonymous internet groups, but most of them just private practitioners. So there's a long way to go before they connect with other traditions and form a larger web.
Yeah, that's what I have noticed also. Because I teach, they come and tell me, but other than that, I don't see much interaction. Yeah.
Ankit, any questions or comments? You've been very silent.
since these cultures do not have a single unidirectional crowd objective, it is difficult for them to correlate with other pagan groups and form a kind of cohesion with them, which is why I feel that contrasting to the Abrahamic, where they do have clear set mob objectives and mob beliefs. This is what I see as.
So this was a wonderfully educational seminar for all of us on polycentricity and pagan traditions, at least in North America, and some of the challenges from a human rights perspective we are facing. So there is definitely need for a dialogue, and maybe we will have some more events. Carl, what is the topic for next week's seminar?
Let me pull it up. Sorry, I didn't have it on my. Yeah, the next week's seminar is by Professor Yashwant Pathak, and the topic is conversion as a human rights violation. Conversion or proselytization as a form of human rights violation. This is on February the 4th. That is next Friday.
And it will be Ankit's turn to work with Professor Pathak to present the seminar.
Yeah.
And I think after that, the faculty preceptor would be Professor Vemsani.
Oh, that's. I think I have until February 28th.
28th? Okay. I'm just.
There is someone, there is someone in the middle.
Yeah, after Professor Pathak is Professor Nalini Rao, and then February 18th is Professor Vemsani.
Oh, 18th. Okay. Okay. I was thinking 28th.
Okay.
Good, you told me.
Yeah, whoever is the fellow, slated to present with you will probably contact you a week in advance so that they can discuss the topic and get some guidance and things like that. It's wonderful that you are able to, join. And
I will join anytime time permits. I always want to join. Sorry, I couldn't join more, but yeah, I will try to join.
Okay. Nice to have you. And with that comment, we will close this seminar because we are past the time. And of course, Carl will upload this on our website, so that will serve as a resource for us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Vemsani. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Good night.